Last month, Sharon spoke the unspeakable. Stunning his Likud party caucus, he referred to Israel's occupation of Arab lands as an occupation. And further, he said, settlements in the West Bank would have to be abandoned, or some of them at any rate, or a few of them at some point. He later fudged it, but by now the cat was out of the bag. Professor Gerald Steinberg of Bar Ilan University in Israel says that Sharon would have chosen his words with extreme care.
What Sharon said in Hebrew, and it's important because the translation sometimes loses the exact flavor. He said the occupation and control of the Palestinian people, 3.5 million Palestinians, is destroying the Jewish democratic nature of Israel. And he said it a number of times, and he said it emphatically. He was very emotionally committed.
David Landau, editor of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, says Sharon has deftly edged into some of the territory Israeli leftists traditionally have staked out for themselves.
On the left of the spectrum, in what's called the peace camp, there are people saying, we've got a new member of the peace camp. His name's Ariel Sharon. The man we've loved to hate is now come over to our side. He's talking the kind of language that we on the left, we in the peace camp, have been talking for decades, saying that this is an occupation. The very word occupation was not used on the right. It's been the word that sort of signifies that you're left of center in Israel. He's not only calling it an occupation, he's saying it's bad for the Palestinians, but bad for the Israelis.
Everyone in Israel is now trying to calculate what's he up to. Is this the same old clever scheming Sharon or a new Sharon?
Clearly there's a very different Sharon. I'm not sure I can point out exactly where we have a new Sharon and an old Sharon. I think he's learned a lot of important lessons. In that sense, there's a very active thinking Sharon, even at the age of 75, who balances all sorts of different pressures. This is a Sharon that's responding to a new world, a new Middle East, and a new Israel. This is after the war in Iraq. Major change in the region, major change in the world. He's responding to President Bush, the Bush administration, and the tremendous pressure from the U.S. to go along with the roadmap.
I don't think there's been very much American pressure on Sharon at all, not by the Bush administration.
Says David Shipler, who wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book on the Middle East, Sharon has changed, but so has the military map of the Middle East. And so he senses the West Bank may no longer provide an invasion artery to Jerusalem.
So the West Bank now becomes really has no military value as a piece of land. I mean, the whole argument Sharon was making to me of, well, look at these wadis, these dry river beds that can be perfect avenues for armored columns to come into the heart of Israel. That argument doesn't hold any water anymore. There are no armored columns prepared to come into Israel at the moment.
There are skeptics who warn Sharon is using all the right language these days simply to appease Washington, that in fact he's simply waiting for Palestinian militants to give him reason to abandon his talk of peace.
Certainly the broad Israeli experience and Sharon's personal experience is that we failed so many times before, the Palestinians didn't deliver, that he can make these kinds of statements but not necessarily have to deliver. He won't have to deliver them in the short term. He may be able to put off the bill for a while. Maybe things will work out differently. He doesn't know that yet. Nobody does.
Sharon, the hardliner, is now doing apparently what politicians have always done. He's moving to capture the middle ground and leaving the diehards on their own, loud perhaps, but isolated and alone.
Sharon finds himself now with the kind of levels of support that he perhaps hasn't had since he came to power, because he's now pulling a lot of support from the left, and he's still got, I believe, the mainstream right with him. So although he's facing raucous, vociferous resistance, you can pigeonhole it. You can say these are the settlers and their political hinterland, but it isn't the mainstream right, because the mainstream right has come to understand that there has to be a separation between Israel and Palestinians. There has to be a partition of Palestine.
Few Israelis are as conscious of their Jewish roots and Jewish history as is Ariel Sharon. He's committed his life to defending his people, and now, it is argued by some, his supreme moment of destiny has arrived.
and he's got his eye on the history books. How's he going to go down in the history of this country? He sees himself as a great warrior, a victorious general in Israel's wars. Will he score among the peacemakers? And as you get older, I assume that these thoughts weigh on you, and they seem to be weighing on him.
Optimists are hoping there is a new Sharon, Sharon the statesman and leader of his nation, and that he has a more sophisticated world view than Sharon the blunt soldier of past wars.
He's not the one-dimensional character that he's often portrayed as, someone who doesn't have a vision and doesn't have a sense of reality of the world, but simply a bulldozer moving right along through whatever obstacles are in front of him. Clearly, he's much more sophisticated and complicated than that.
Oh, I'd say be careful, because he's quite charming, and he's very friendly, and he is engaging. He listens to your questions. He gives you answers. He doesn't beat around the bush, but at the same time, what he says is not necessarily what he will do.
We need to take account also of the way that these sort of things build up a momentum of their own. You know, I mean, he said things that he's never said before. Those things have resonance. Words like occupation, words like a Palestinian state living alongside Israel in peace, those sort of things build up a momentum of their own. So even though he, at this point in time, might not himself know where he's going, where the end of this road will lead, he may not know where the roadmap will eventually pan out for Israel and for the Palestinians, he must know that he's walked the first steps, and that can build up a dynamic of its own.
There's doubtless some of Sharon the foxy general still in play here, keeping everyone guessing. But in diplomacy, as in war, so much is in the timing, looking for that instant, the decisive moment has come, and then making your move. For The National, I'm Dan B. Arneson in Toronto.